Right now, there is a basic test for journalists and for politicians, and it is a litmus test, the litmus test of our time. Donald Trump, the president of the United States, has committed his country to commit an abominable crime. He's committed the US to annexing Gaza and ethnically cleansing its entire population. This is a grave and indisputable crime. The bare minimum right now is just to state the facts. That what Donald Trump has proposed is ethnic cleansing, a fact, that's number one, and that this is an objective violation of international law, that's number two. Well, we have seen how our journalists and our politicians have failed, disastrously failed, from the very beginning, over and over again, and how they have helped to facilitate genocide. Let's start with Donald Trump's comments. Let's listen to what he said before the press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and wanted man by virtue of the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which again, incidentally, journalists should be telling their audiences as a bare minimum.
We continue to press for this idea that Jordan and Egypt take Palestinians from Gaza.
Yeah, I would like to see Jordan. I'd like to see Egypt take some. Look, the Gaza thing has not worked. It's never worked. And I feel very differently about Gaza than a lot of people. I think they should get a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, and we get some people to put up the money to build it and make it nice and make it habitable and enjoyable and make it a home.
They don't want to leave, though. Palestinians say they don't want to leave.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site. It's a pure demolition site. If we could find the right piece of land or numerous pieces of land and build them some really nice places with plenty of money in the area, that's for sure, I think that would be a lot better than going back to Gaza, which has had just decades and decades of death.
The casual way he talks about our homeland, the Gaza thing has not worked. It's never worked. What hasn't worked, let's just be very clear, is the Israeli state repeatedly murderously driving the Palestinian people from their homes, including 750,000 people in 1948, which was achieved by slaughtering around 15,000 people. The deprivation of a people's right to national self-determination, occupying their land, stealing their land, colonizing their land, besieging their land, subjugating them through apartheid. This has not worked on its own terms. It's only led to violence, instability, and chaos. That has not produced peace or security, or whichever of those words you wish to choose. This is not a Gaza-specific problem. This is a problem of oppression. There can never be peace when there is oppression. Now, Trump talks about giving the people of Gaza a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land. Well, firstly, the people of Gaza do not want to leave their homeland. It is their homeland. It is where they live. And they know from their history that leaving their homeland means they are never going to be allowed back, which we'll come on to. If Trump wants to talk about the people of Gaza getting a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, well, Riyad Mansour, Palestine's ambassador to the United Nations, got an idea.
Our country and our home is the Gaza Strip. It's part of Palestine. We have no home. For those who want to send them to a happy, nice place, let them go back, to their original homes inside Israel. There are nice places there, and they will be happy to return to these places.
He says that because the vast majority of people in Gaza are indeed the families of refugees who were forced to flee their homes in what is now Israel. Now, Trump just casually describes Gaza as a demolition site. In doing so, he casually accepts that Israel must have committed an abominable crime, because that's what flattening an entire land constitutes. Clearly, there's no military justification for doing so. This actually puts Joe Biden perversely to shame, because he never admitted what Israel had actually done with the weapons that he had supplied. Now, let's go on to the press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Would Palestinians have the right to return to Gaza if they left while the rebuilding was happening?
It would be my hope that we could do something really nice, really good, where they wouldn't want to return. Why would they want to return? The place has been hell. It's been one of the meanest, toughest places on earth. And right now, I've seen every picture from every angle, better than if I were there. and nobody can live there. You can't live there.
And if Egypt
So if we
and
can
Jordan,
build,
you know-
if we can build them through massive amounts of money supplied by other people, very rich nations, and they're willing to supply it. If we can build something for them in one of the countries, and it could be Jordan, it could be Egypt, it could be other countries, and you could build 4 or 5 or 6 areas. It doesn't have to be one area, but you take certain areas and you build really good quality housing, like a beautiful town, like someplace where they can live and not die. Because Gaza is a guarantee that they're going to end up dying. The same thing's going to happen again. It's happened over and over again, and it's going to happen again as sure as you're standing there, Peter. So I hope that we could do something where they wouldn't want to go back. Who would want to go back? They've experienced nothing but death and destruction.
So Trump makes absolutely clear, with no ambiguity of any description, that he wants the permanent ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people of Gaza. If you speak to almost anyone in Gaza, they will tell you of their love for, their devotion towards Gaza, their home. When Trump says it's been one of the meanest, tougher places on earth, and says they've experienced nothing but death and destruction, why does he think that's the case? I don't know, perhaps sitting next to Netanyahu might give him some clues. That's because Gaza was subjected to direct military occupation and then a brutal siege and repeated Israeli onslaughts prior to 7th of October, in which a whole litany of war crimes were committed. Just months before 7th of October, in May 2023, for example, Israel bombed Gaza and killed several children. This happened under successive Israeli leaders. These crimes, by the way, let's not just make Benjamin Netanyahu the convenient bogeyman. And all of it was facilitated by Israel's patron, the United States of America. Now, it should be noted that Trump's call for a beautiful area for Palestinians to settle permanently is itself a nonsense. He's called for Jordan and Egypt to take in the people of Gaza. Well, both countries have declared they will refuse to do that. It should be noted, by the way, that the majority of Jordan's population is Palestinian or of Palestinian heritage. That is, those who expelled or indeed forced to flee Palestine. If either of those regimes complied, there would be a mass uprising undoubtedly on the streets of those countries, which could quite conceivably overthrow both of those regimes. Which is why, by the way, I think Middle East Eye has been briefed that Jordan would go to war with Israel if it sought to expel Palestinians to its territory. The article actually notes it would be an existential issue for Jordan and its Hashemite royal family, because Jordan has the 3rd poorest water supply on earth, and its 12 million citizens largely live in a strip of land which runs across Israel's border, so it would not be possible to host any significant number of refugees, the morality of facilitating ethnic cleansing aside. Now, it's notable too in Trump's comments that he talks about other rich countries providing a lot of money to build these new settlements for the ethnically cleansed Palestinians. Who's going to do that and why? Spend a vast sum of money facilitating the crime of ethnic cleansing committed by the US and Israel. Why are they going to fit the bill for that criminal act? And note, by the way, the grin painted on Netanyahu's face, the sickening, grotesque grin on his face, as Trump describes Gaza being absolute hell and discusses the death and destruction there. Look at his pride at the horror he's inflicted on an entire people. He's listening and no doubt visualizing what he's done, the decisions he's taken, the orders he's made. Now, it should be noted, as Israeli anti-genocide writer and activist Asaf Ronol has told me, Netanyahu knows he can't do anything other than smile. If he says a single word of support, it will be added to the International Criminal Court case against him. Also, note this from Trump.
How many people are you thinking about?
All of them. I mean, we're talking about probably 1.7 million people, 1.7 million, maybe 1.8 million. But I think all of them. I think they'll be resettled in areas where they can live a beautiful life and not be worried about dying every day.
Note the number he's using there. He says 1.7 million people, maybe 1.8. There were up to 2.3 million people in Gaza before the genocide began. Now, a certain number did actually manage to leave, but this would still suggest Trump believes hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, which suggests he has access to high-level data from the US and Israeli intelligence services that we don't, though there are, of course, estimates from public health experts, for example, which suggests such a huge number. And then, of course, there was this from Donald Trump.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it.
casually declaring that the United States will annex Gaza. Well, this is completely and utterly insane, even by the standards of this man. The US president is declaring he will annex and violently expel the people of Gaza. Now, before we look at the way the media has framed all this, we should listen to Heidi Matthews, Associate Professor of Law, expert on international law, and particularly questions of genocide. She says many are calling this idea ethnic cleansing. That's not it. In this context of mass atrocity and destruction, forced transfer would be genocide. Indeed, it's worth noting what Omer Bartov, the Israeli-American professor of Holocaust and genocide studies at Brown University, told me towards the beginning of all this, about the fine line between ethnic cleansing and genocide. He declared ethnic cleansing frequently became genocide because, brutally speaking, people do not want to be ethnically cleansed and therefore they are murdered. Indeed, genocide means the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial or religious group in whole or in part. This is genocide. But the bar is on the floor here, and the least we can expect is for unambiguous ethnic cleansing to be called ethnic cleansing by media outlets. Yet look at how dire these journalists are. Look how cowardly, look how spineless, look how complicit they are. Let's just listen to this one moment from the press conference.
The Israelis have stood strong and united in the face of an enemy that has kidnapped, tortured, raped, and slaughtered innocent men, women, children, and even little babies.
On that infamous day, Hamas monsters savagely murdered 1,200 innocent people, including more than 40 Americans. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burnt babies alive.
Let me just say this directly. It is a lie. A total lie to say that babies were burned alive on 7th of October, were burned to death or anything like that. It's a total unambiguous lie. One Israeli baby was killed on the 7th of October. Her name was Mila Cohen. She was 8 months old and she was shot dead through the door of a safe room. And this, by the way, is a crime. No question. The point is, if this is a crime, which it is, where does it leave the at least 1,100 Palestinian babies killed through Israeli bombs, explosives, shelling, and bullets? There was another horrible case of a pregnant woman who was shot, which killed her unborn baby on the 7th of October. Again, that's a terrible crime. Countless Palestinian pregnant women and their unborn babies have been violently slaughtered by the Israeli army. Why this lie about burning babies? Because it is an attempt to make a distinction between the form of violence deployed by Israel compared to its enemies in order to justify genocide. We may kill more, but they're savages. And it's particularly perverse because many of the Palestinian babies slaughtered were burned alive because of missiles, explosives, and indeed, weapons fired by the Israeli army. No journalist, not one, challenged these lies. With Trump there talking about slaughtering innocent men, women, and children, when tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian men, women, and children have been slaughtered, but they don't qualify as human beings to him. The failure of journalists to just correct lies shows their complicity, shows their cowards, shows their failures as journalists. They are bad journalists. They shouldn't be there. People who can do their job should be there instead of them. Now let's listen to Sky News.
The idea that Gazans should leave and move somewhere else and that a new home should be built for them elsewhere, that has been an idea that has been raised increasingly over quite a few weeks now, months maybe even, by Trump officials. There was a talk about them being moved to Indonesia at one point. The focus from Trump is that they should be going to Egypt and to Jordan. Those two countries will not take them at the moment. Trump seems to think he can change their minds. We'll see how that develops.
That's Mark Stone, the US correspondent of Sky News. What is this man thinking? What's going through his head right there? He says the idea that Gazans should leave and move somewhere else and that a new home should be built for them elsewhere. Why this convoluted nonsense when he should say this is ethnic cleansing and it is a crime? It goes against international law. Who is this man scared of? His editors? The White House? Does he not know the law? Does he not know what ethnic cleansing is? If you can't do your job, get out of the way. Resign. Stop embarrassing yourself. Let someone who knows what they're talking about and or isn't a coward take your place. You're a bad journalist. Very straightforward. Now, let's look at how the BBC splashed on this announcement on their website front page, which is the most read news website on earth. The headline, Trump suggests US could take over and redevelop Gaza as he hosts Netanyahu with a subheading, the president says the US could take the lead in removing unexploded bombs and rebuilding Gaza after resettling Palestinians in other countries. Goodness me. Suggests, redevelop, removing unexploded bombs, rebuilding Gaza, resettling. A farcically disturbing, positive spin on the grave crime of ethnic cleansing. What about the Telegraph? Trump offers to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. Oh, how generous of him. Shameless churning out of Trumpian propaganda. The Times newspaper. Trump says US will take over Gaza and make it Riviera of the Middle East. Sorry, are these newspapers just being dictated by Trump's press offices with virtually the same headlines? The Independent newspaper, where I once worked. Trump says US wants to take over Gaza and create a Riviera of the Middle East. I'm losing my mind here. Then the subheading will own it and be responsible for dismantling unexploded bombs. US president says at White House press conference with Israeli counterpart Benjamin Netanyahu. Again, it makes it sound like he's being generous. Makes it sound like he's making this amazing offer. What a sick joke from an embarrassment of a so-called newspaper which long lost any meaningful reason to exist. Why are you even there still? The headline of Reuters, Trump suggests permanently displacing Palestinians from Gaza. Nothing, zero zilch about ethnic cleansing. The New York Times front page, splash. Trump declares that US should seize control of Gaza. That's the main takeaway. Nothing about ethnic cleansing. Next headline, all 2 million Palestinians there should be relocated, he says. This is called ethnic cleansing. You're using euphemisms. You are normalizing a crime in which you are complicit. And then another story headlined, analysis with Gaza plan and unbound Trump pushes an improbable idea. Is that your takeaway? An obscene crime is simply referred to as an improbable idea. It's about being unrealistic rather than criminal. The Washington Post. Trump proposes US take over Gaza with a subheading about Trump having suggested Gaza should leave the war-torn area and that the US would step in and develop it. Do you know what? You suggest going for an Indian or a Chinese takeaway. Suggested Gaza should leave the war-torn... Nothing, again, about an ethnic cleansing. I could go on, but the mental health of all of you, is at stake with me just reeling off this nonsense, this disturbing nonsense. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to say this, though. Many journalists in mainstream outlets like to think they're courageous truth tellers, speaking out without fear or favour, holding the powerful to account whoever they are. Well, my friends, Israel's genocide in Gaza really was the litmus test of our age. A crime. A terrible crime from start to finish, an abominable crime. Countless atrocities broadcast to the world shamelessly every day and unapologetically boasted about by Israeli leaders and officials and their cheerleaders and their allies. Those journalists who did not describe this crime for what it is helped normalize and facilitate genocide. They are villains. They contributed to this. The blood of Palestinians is on their hands. That is what they did. And they will never, ever, ever scrub the shame away, and nor should we let them. And as I've said from the start, those who directly facilitated the crime through providing weapons, for example, they've got to go to jail. But as I've also said, careers have to end. We have to make these media outlets and those journalists pay for what they've done. Not saying this for vengeance, not saying this because I get a kick out of it. The reason we have to do this is because if there is no accountability, then we allow the normalization of the most extreme depravity imaginable. And then our whole world will burn. You see, the sort of crime now being committed, now being proposed, on top of the crime that has already been perpetrated, will break whatever we call the international order, whatever remains of it. And it will also lead to the end of whatever Western democracy happens to be. At the end of the 19th century in the US, something called the Anti-Imperialist League was founded. It was not founded by people on the left, far from it. It was in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War, when there were fears that the US would become an empire rather than a republic, like the European colonial powers, because of the proposed annexation and colonization of the Philippines. They feared the US would go from being that republic into that empire and a tyranny. Well, look, Trump suggesting annexing Gaza and annexing Canada. That isn't joking around. He wants to build some sort of empire with him as emperor. That will end democracy as we understand it, normalize aggressive expansionism, and plunge the world into total violent disorder. And those who thought he was, he's an isolationist, how can we call him a fascist? Come on. I think militaristic expansionism, I think we can throw that into the fascism box. If we don't have accountability, then we will have normalization of crimes of this scale, which will lead to the world as we know it burning. And we cannot allow that. And that's why we have to stand up to these journalists as well as these politicians. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, your comments. I hope you can see how we've expanded these operations. We've made the channel better and expanded on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. That's the brilliant hard work of someone I've hired because of you. So if you want to continue just expanding, building in these dark, dark times, to offer an alternative to the dire media outlets, which I've gone through, then you can at patreon.com/OwenJones84. Listen to the podcast. I've got more news on that to come, and I will speak to you soon.